I need to show you something that's been keeping me up at night. Back in late 2019, a trail camera in the Alaskan wilderness captured what might be the clearest footage of Bigfoot ever recorded. The footage is grainy, sure, but what they show is unmistakable. A massive, bipedal figure moving through snow-covered terrain with a gait that doesn't match any known animal. The footage appeared briefly on online forums, sparked intense debate, and then nothing. No follow-up investigation, no expert analysis, no news coverage. The person who posted it vanished from the discussion, and the whole thing just faded away like so many other Bigfoot sightings. But here's the thing, I can't stop thinking about it. I've spent months tracking down everything I could find about this footage. I've reached out to cryptozoology researchers, combed through countless forum posts, and even tried to identify the exact location based on the terrain visible in the images. What I discovered is both fascinating and frustrating. This footage might be the smoking gun we've all been waiting for, or it might be another elaborate hoax in a long line of hoaxes. But the more I dig into it, the more convinced I become that something genuinely strange happened in those Alaskan woods. Let me walk you through what we're looking at here. The original poster claimed they were reviewing footage from a motion-activated trail camera they'd set up to monitor wildlife near their property. Alaska, as you probably know, is home to all sorts of large animals: moose, bears, wolves. Trail cameras are common out there, especially in remote areas where people want to keep tabs on what's wandering through their land. This particular camera was positioned along what looked like a game trail, judging by the worn path visible in the snow. The footage itself is short, maybe 10 seconds total, but those 10 seconds are absolutely remarkable. The first frame shows a massive figure emerging from a stand of bare trees. The lighting suggests either early morning or late afternoon, that golden hour when shadows are long and visibility is actually pretty good despite the low angle of the sun. The figure is dark, almost black against the white snow. And it's huge, based on the trees in the background, which appear to be standard Alaskan spruce and birch. We're looking at something that stands at least 7 to 8 feet tall. Let me break down exactly what the images show, frame by frame, because the details matter here. In the first clear frame, the figure is positioned slightly left of center in the composition. The snow beneath it appears undisturbed ahead of its path, but compressed behind it, showing clear evidence that this thing has weight and mass. The snow compression pattern is interesting. It's not the kind of neat, circular prints you'd see from someone walking in snow boots. These are deeper impressions, slightly elongated, suggesting feet that are longer and wider than human feet. The body posture is what really catches my attention. The figure leans slightly forward as it walks, which is consistent with how a large primate would move. The center of gravity appears to be different from a human, more forward, with the massive upper body balanced by powerful leg muscles. The arms don't just swing naturally, they swing with purpose, moving in coordination with the leg movement in a way that suggests genuine biomechanical function rather than someone trying to imitate how they think a Bigfoot should walk. The head is barely visible above those massive shoulders, and this is another detail that's difficult to fake convincingly. Most Bigfoot costumes have a visible neck, even if it's thick, because the human performer inside needs room for their head to move. This figure appears to have almost no neck at all. The head sits directly on the shoulders like you'd see in a gorilla or other great ape. The skull shape, what little we can discern, appears somewhat conical or dome-shaped rather than round like a human head. With the figure's position and movement speed, we can see the creature more fully. It's closer to the camera, and the resolution, while still limited by trail camera technology, gives us a better view of its overall form. The legs are incredibly thick and muscular, resembling tree trunks more than human legs. The thighs in particular look massively developed, which makes sense for a creature that would need to traverse steep, snow-covered mountain terrain regularly. What's particularly striking is the fur or hair covering. It's not uniform. There are variations in color and density visible even in the grainy footage. The chest and upper body appear to have denser, darker hair, while the limbs might have slightly lighter or thinner coverage. This kind of variation is exactly what you'd expect in a real animal adapted to cold climates. A costume would typically have more uniform artificial fur throughout, and these subtle variations in texture and color would be expensive and time-consuming to achieve. But here's what really gets me: the movement. This thing walks with a distinctive gait that's neither quite human nor quite ape. It's bipedal, definitely, with long, powerful legs that cover ground quickly. The arms swing naturally as it walks, but they hang lower than human arms would, reaching almost to the knees. The shoulders are absolutely massive, giving an incredibly top-heavy appearance. And the head, or what we can see of it, sits directly on these shoulders with almost no visible neck. Everything about the proportions is just slightly off from what you'd expect if this were a person in a suit. The figure moves across the frame with what I can only describe as purpose. It's not wandering aimlessly or searching for food like a bear might. It's walking from point A to point B, following that game trail with the confidence of something that knows exactly where it's going. There's no hesitation, no stopping to sniff the air or check its surroundings, just steady, powerful forward motion. And then it's gone, disappearing back into the tree line on the other side of the clearing. Now let's talk about the online response to this footage. The original post appeared on a popular cryptozoology forum with the simple title, "Trail Cam Caught Something on My Property." The poster, who I'll leave anonymous out of respect for their privacy, included 2 images extracted from the video file. They claimed to be a longtime resident of rural Alaska who had set up multiple trail cameras around their property to document wildlife. This particular camera had been in place for about 6 months and had captured plenty of ordinary animals: bears, moose, foxes, even a wolverine. But this was different. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some people were absolutely convinced this was authentic. They pointed out details in the images that would be nearly impossible to fake with a costume. The way the creature's weight shifts as it walks, causing slight distortions in the snow beneath its feet. The natural way its fur moves with the motion of its body, not like a costume that hangs stiffly. The sheer size of it, which would require an extremely tall person and a remarkably sophisticated costume. One commenter wrote, "I've seen bears on trail cameras, I've seen moose, I've seen people trying to be sneaky. This is none of those things." But the skeptics had their say too, and they raised valid points. Several people noted that the quality of the images, while good enough to show something remarkable, was conveniently just low enough to make definitive identification impossible. The pixelation and motion blur could be hiding details that would expose this as a hoax. Others questioned why the poster only released these 2 frames instead of the full video file. Some suggested the whole thing was CGI, a digital creation superimposed onto real trail camera footage of an Alaskan forest. One thing that struck me about the online discussion was how quickly it escalated and then how suddenly it died. For about 3 days, this was the hot topic in Bigfoot circles. People were analyzing every pixel, drawing comparison diagrams, debating whether the footage could be authenticated by experts. And then the original poster stopped responding to comments. They didn't answer questions about the camera's exact location, didn't provide the full video file despite numerous requests, didn't engage with offers from researchers to visit the site. They just disappeared. Some forum members speculated that the poster got scared. Alaska is a place where people value their privacy and their property rights. Maybe they realized that releasing this footage would bring unwanted attention. Cryptozoology enthusiasts showing up on their land, researchers wanting access to their property, maybe even vandalism or harassment from skeptics. Or maybe they realized they'd posted something they shouldn't have, something that could identify their location and compromise their safety. Alaska is remote, and some folks out there prefer to keep it that way. Others had darker theories. A few commenters suggested the poster might have been contacted by government agencies and told to take the footage down. This might sound paranoid, but if you follow Bigfoot research at all, you know this is a recurring theme. The idea that there's some sort of official suppression of Bigfoot evidence isn't new. It's been floating around since at least the 1970s. The reasoning goes that if Bigfoot were proven to exist, it would have massive implications for land use, logging, development, and countless other economic activities in wilderness areas. This brings me to David Paulides, whose work I think is absolutely crucial to understanding cases like this. For those who aren't familiar, Paulides is a former law enforcement officer who spent years investigating mysterious disappearances in national parks and wilderness areas across North America. His Missing 411 series has documented hundreds of cases that share strange, unsettling patterns. And while he's careful not to make definitive claims about what's causing these disappearances, he's certainly hinted at the possibility of an unknown primate species being involved. Paulides has pointed out some fascinating patterns in his research. Many disappearances occur in areas with previous Bigfoot sightings. People vanish in good weather, often during daylight hours, despite being experienced outdoors. People who know the terrain. Search dogs frequently lose the scent or refuse to track certain trails, which is highly unusual. And in cases where people are found alive, they often have gaps in their memory or tell stories that don't quite add up, like they were confused or disoriented in ways that can't be explained by simple exposure or injury. Let me share some specific cases from Paulides' research that involve Alaska. In 2004, a hunter disappeared near Fairbanks while tracking what he believed was a moose. His last radio contact indicated he was following large tracks through the snow, but he sounded confused, saying the tracks didn't look quite right. Search teams found his abandoned rifle and backpack 3 days later, but the hunter himself was never found. What makes this case unusual is that the search dogs lost his scent at a specific point, as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. Another case from 2007 involved a geologist working near Glacier Bay who disappeared during a solo expedition. His tent was found intact with all his equipment inside, including his GPS device, which showed no record of him traveling beyond the immediate area. Yet extensive searches turned up nothing. 6 months later, hikers found human remains 12 miles from the campsite, in terrain so rough that park rangers couldn't understand how anyone could have traveled there, especially in the winter conditions that prevailed when the geologist vanished. What's particularly interesting about Paulides' work is how he connects geographical patterns to Bigfoot reports. He's created maps showing clusters of disappearances, and when you overlay those maps with historical Bigfoot sighting data, there's significant overlap. Areas with high concentrations of missing persons cases tend to also have high concentrations of Bigfoot reports. This could be coincidence. Remote wilderness areas might simply be dangerous for multiple reasons, but the correlation is striking enough to warrant serious consideration. Paulides has also documented cases where survivors report encounters with something they describe as not quite human, but not quite animal. These reports don't always use the word Bigfoot. Sometimes people describe it as a wild man, a giant, or simply something I couldn't identify. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. Tall, hair-covered, moving with unusual speed and grace through difficult terrain, and displaying what seems like intelligence in how it avoids or observes humans. One case that particularly haunts me involves a young man who went missing in Denali National Park in 2010. He was an experienced climber and had summited several major peaks. His climb was going well until his last radio check-in, when he reported seeing something large moving on a nearby ridge. His tone apparently changed. He sounded anxious, uncertain. After that transmission, silence. Rescue teams found his campsite disturbed, equipment scattered, but no sign of the climber. What they did find were unusual footprints in the snow around the camp. Prints that were much larger than human prints and showed a stride length that suggested something much taller. The official explanation was that he fell into a crevasse, but that doesn't account for the disturbed campsite or the unusual tracks. And it doesn't explain why his distress beacon was never activated. These devices are designed to be foolproof, and this climber was experienced enough to use it even in the most stressful situations. Paulides suggests that something interrupted him before he could activate the beacon, something that took him completely by surprise despite his experience and training. Now, Paulides doesn't come out and say Bigfoot is abducting people, but he certainly compiled enough strange data to make you wonder what exactly is happening in these wilderness areas. And Alaska features prominently in his research. The state has one of the highest rates of missing persons per capita in the United States. Some of that can be explained by the harsh environment, the vast distances, and the relatively small population spread across an enormous landscape. But some cases defy easy explanation. One of Paulides' key arguments is that if there's an unknown primate species in North America, it would need to be incredibly intelligent and elusive to have avoided definitive documentation for this long. We're not talking about a dumb animal blundering around the woods. We're talking about something that understands human behavior well enough to avoid our technology, that can move through terrain without leaving obvious traces, that might even understand on some level that cameras and recording devices are threats. This could explain why clear Bigfoot footage is so rare, and why trail camera evidence, when it does appear, often vanishes or gets dismissed. Looking at this Alaska trail camera footage through that lens makes it even more intriguing. If this really is a Bigfoot, it apparently didn't know the trail camera was there, or didn't care. Maybe it was focused on something else, moving quickly to reach a destination and temporarily letting its guard down. Or maybe, and this is what really gets me, it's becoming bolder. There are theories in Bigfoot research that these creatures are changing their behavior as human presence in wilderness areas increases. They're being forced out of their traditional territories, forced to take more risks, forced to move through areas they might have avoided in the past. The timing is interesting too. This footage emerged in late 2019, right before the pandemic disrupted everything. If you follow patterns in Bigfoot sightings, there was actually an uptick in reports during 2018 and 2019 across the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. Some researchers attributed this to more people getting out in nature, more trail cameras being deployed, and increased awareness leading to more reports of older sightings. But others wondered if something had changed in Bigfoot behavior or population dynamics. Let's talk about the technology itself for a moment, because understanding trail cameras is crucial to evaluating this footage. Modern trail cameras are remarkable pieces of equipment, but they have significant limitations. Most operate using passive infrared sensors that detect movement and heat signatures. When something warm-blooded moves through the detection zone, the camera triggers and captures either a photo or a short video clip. The response time, the delay between when movement is detected and when the camera starts recording, can range from a fraction of a second to several seconds depending on the camera model and settings. This response time is important because it means trail cameras don't capture the complete picture of what's happening. They miss the approach, and depending on how fast something is moving, they might only catch a glimpse before it passes through the frame. In our Alaska footage, we're seeing what the camera captured, but we're not seeing what happened before or after. The Bigfoot might have been in the area for minutes before triggering the sensor. It might have stopped and observed its surroundings after leaving the frame. We're getting a snapshot of a larger event. The image quality of trail cameras is another factor to consider. Even high-end models, which can cost several $100s, produce images that are nowhere near the quality of a standard digital camera or smartphone. They're designed for functionality in harsh conditions rather than image quality. Most use relatively low-resolution sensors, basic lenses, and aggressive compression to save battery life and storage space. This means fine details get lost, edges get fuzzy, and anything moving quickly can appear as a blur. For Bigfoot research, these technical limitations are both a curse and a blessing. On one hand, they mean we're unlikely to get crystal clear, definitive footage from a trail camera even if a Bigfoot walks directly in front of it. On the other hand, they make hoaxing more difficult in some ways. Creating CGI or a costume that looks convincing in poor quality, compressed trail camera footage is actually harder than it sounds. You need to match the specific artifacts and limitations of trail camera technology. The motion blur, the color balance issues, the way compression affects fine details like fur texture. The Alaska footage shows all the hallmarks of genuine trail camera output. The timestamp and camera model information appear authentic. The compression artifacts are consistent with what you'd expect from a mid-range trail camera. The lighting, while challenging, is handled in ways that match how these cameras process low-light situations. If this is a hoax, whoever created it understood trail camera technology well enough to replicate its limitations convincingly. There's also the question of field of view and placement. Trail cameras are typically positioned at chest to head height and angled slightly downward to capture passing animals. The Alaska camera appears to have been set up this way, which is why we get such a good view of the Bigfoot's upper body and torso, but less detail on its head and lower legs. This positioning is standard for wildlife monitoring, but it's not ideal for capturing a full-body view of something as tall as the figure in the footage. Another technical consideration is detection range. Most trail cameras have an effective detection range of about 50 to 80 feet, though this varies based on the size and heat signature of what's moving. The Bigfoot in the footage appears to be at the outer edge of this range when first detected, which explains why it's captured mid-stride rather than approaching from outside the frame. This detail actually adds credibility. It suggests the camera was triggered by a genuine large, warm-blooded animal, rather than being manually activated by a hoaxer. Let's talk about the location for a minute. The original poster never revealed the exact location, but based on the vegetation and terrain visible in the images, several researchers tried to narrow it down. The trees look like a mix of white spruce and paper birch, which are common throughout interior Alaska. The topography in the background suggests mountainous terrain but not extreme elevation, probably somewhere in the foothills rather than the high peaks. The snow depth indicates this was probably taken in late fall or early winter, that transitional period when there's substantial snow on the ground, but the deep winter pack hasn't fully set in yet. Several people speculated this might be somewhere in the Alaska Range or possibly the White Mountains area north of Fairbanks. Both regions have long histories of Bigfoot reports. The White Mountains in particular have been a hotspot for sightings going back decades. Locals tell stories of encounters on remote trails, strange vocalizations heard at night, and massive tracks found in snow and mud. If you talk to people who live in that area, especially Indigenous people who've been there for generations, many will tell you that Bigfoot, or whatever you want to call it, is just accepted as part of the ecosystem. This touches on an important aspect of Bigfoot research that doesn't get enough attention. indigenous knowledge, and oral tradition. Native Alaskan cultures have stories about large, hairy humanoids going back centuries. The Tlingit people speak of kushtaka, shape-shifting beings that sometimes appear as hair-covered giants. The Dena'ina people have traditions about Nantinak, wilderness men covered in hair who avoid human contact. These aren't recent inventions or cultural contamination from modern Bigfoot mythology. These stories predate European contact by hundreds or thousands of years. The Tlingit traditions are particularly detailed. Kushtaka are described as beings that live between the human and animal worlds, possessing intelligence and the ability to communicate, but choosing to remain hidden from most people. According to traditional stories, Kushtaka can be dangerous, but aren't inherently malevolent. They simply exist according to their own rules and logic. Encounters with them are considered significant events, often marking turning points in a person's life or serving as warnings about respecting wilderness boundaries. The Nantinak of Dena'ina tradition are described somewhat differently. These are portrayed as forest dwellers who live in family groups, gather plants and catch fish, and maintain their own territories that they defend from intruders. They're said to be immensely strong but generally peaceful unless threatened. The Dena'ina have specific protocols for what to do if you encounter a Nantinak. Primarily, you don't make eye contact, you don't speak, and you slowly back away while making it clear you're leaving their territory. What's remarkable about these traditional accounts is how they describe behavior that matches modern Bigfoot reports. The avoidance of human contact, the maintenance of territories, the family group structure, the gathering of plants and fishing, all of these elements appear in contemporary witness testimony from people who have never heard of Nantinak or Kushtaka. This consistency across time and culture is difficult to explain away as mere coincidence or cultural influence. The Yupik people of Western Alaska have their own traditions about Tornrate, beings that exist in liminal spaces between the known and unknown. While Tornrate encompass various spirit entities in Yupik cosmology, some descriptions match what we'd recognize as Bigfoot. Tall, hair-covered figures that appear at dusk or dawn, that move through the landscape with supernatural grace, that seem to know when humans are present even when they can't be seen. Yupik elders teach that Tornrate are part of the natural world and should be respected but not feared. I had the privilege of speaking with an Alaska Native elder who shared some perspectives on these traditions. He explained that in his culture's worldview, the question of whether Bigfoot exists in a scientific sense misses the point. These beings are part of the spiritual and physical landscape, neither purely flesh and blood animals nor purely supernatural entities. They exist in a way that doesn't fit neatly into Western categories of real versus imaginary, natural versus supernatural. This elder also mentioned that younger generations sometimes struggle with these traditional teachings because they've been taught to think in scientific terms where everything must be empirically proven. But the old knowledge doesn't work that way. It's based on accumulated observation over countless generations, passed down through stories and teachings. When elders say these beings exist, they're not speculating. They're sharing knowledge that has been verified repeatedly through their people's lived experience. The Haida Nation, whose traditional territories include parts of southeast Alaska, have stories about Gaget, wild men of the forest. The Haida describe Gaget as being able to communicate through whistles and calls that can be heard over great distances. Modern Bigfoot researchers have recorded similar vocalizations in areas where sightings occur, long, haunting calls that don't match any known animal species. The correlation between traditional Haida accounts and modern audio evidence is striking. It's worth noting that these indigenous traditions don't present these beings as monsters or threats to be feared. They're described as part of the natural order, creatures that have their place in the ecosystem just like bears or wolves. The fact that they avoid humans is seen as wisdom rather than mystery. They've learned over time that human contact brings danger. From this perspective, the rarity of Bigfoot sightings isn't puzzling. It's exactly what you'd expect from an intelligent species that has good reason to stay hidden. When you hear these traditional stories and then look at modern sightings like our trail camera footage, patterns emerge. The creatures are described as tall and powerfully built. They move quickly and quietly through the forest. They seem to understand human behavior and generally avoid contact, but occasionally they're spotted, usually briefly, and often in situations where they appear to be traveling from one place to another. The consistency across centuries and across different indigenous cultures is striking. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say the Bigfoot in the frame. Is this footage authentic? I've spent countless hours examining these images, and I'll be honest, I don't know. There are elements that suggest authenticity. The proportions of the figure are unusual in ways that would be difficult to fake. The movement, even in the brief sequence we can see, looks natural and fluid. The way the creature interacts with the environment, the way it's clearly following a specific path through the snow, suggests something that belongs there, not a person in a costume trying to create a hoax. But there are also reasons to be skeptical. The convenient lack of a full video file is suspicious. The poster's disappearance from the discussion is concerning, and let's be honest, we live in an age where CGI technology is incredibly sophisticated and available to anyone with a decent computer and some time to learn the software. Creating a convincing few seconds of Bigfoot footage isn't beyond the abilities of a skilled hobbyist anymore. I've reached out to several CGI experts to ask their opinions on the footage. Most were reluctant to make definitive statements, but a few offered interesting observations. One pointed out that the lighting and shadows appear consistent throughout the image, which would be quite difficult to fake. CGI often struggles with the subtle ways natural light interacts with three-dimensional objects. Another noted that the level of detail in the creature's movement would require motion capture technology and considerable skill to achieve. A third suggested that if this is CGI, it's remarkably well done, probably professional level work rather than an amateur hoax. The costume possibility is another angle worth exploring. I actually contacted several professional costume designers who work in film and television, people who create ape and creature suits for a living. I showed them the images and asked, "Could you make something like this?" The consensus was interesting. Yes, they could create a suit that might look similar in low-resolution trail camera footage, but it would be expensive, time-consuming, and would require a very tall performer, probably someone at least 6'6" or taller. And even then, getting the movement right would be challenging. One costume designer made an excellent point. If I were going to hoax a Bigfoot sighting, I wouldn't use trail camera footage. I'd set up my own cameras with controlled lighting in better resolution, then claim I captured it accidentally. Trail camera footage is terrible for showing off the quality of a costume because all that pixelation and compression hides your work. If you're spending thousands of dollars on a Bigfoot suit, you want people to see the details. That argument actually makes a lot of sense to me. Let's talk about the comparison to other famous Bigfoot footage. Obviously, the Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967 is the gold standard. That footage, shot in Northern California, shows a female Bigfoot walking along a creek bed. It's been analyzed exhaustively for over 50 years, and while skeptics insist it must be a costume, no one has definitively proven it's a hoax. The creature in the Patterson-Gimlin film moves with that same unusual gait we see in the Alaska trail camera footage. The long stride, the bent knee walk, the arm swing that's different from human locomotion. The Alaska footage is shorter and lower quality than Patterson-Gimlin, but there are similarities. The overall body proportions match pretty closely: massively built upper body, powerful legs, arms that hang low. The way both creatures move through their respective environments with apparent confidence and purpose is similar. If the Alaska footage is a hoax, the hoaxer did their homework and created something that's consistent with what we see in other purportedly authentic footage. There's also the famous Freeman footage from 1994, shot in Washington State. That footage shows what appears to be a Bigfoot digging in the snow, and like our Alaska trail camera footage, it's tantalizing but not definitive. The quality is just good enough to make you think you're seeing something remarkable, but just poor enough to leave room for doubt. This seems to be a pattern with Bigfoot evidence. We get close, but we never quite get that undeniable proof. Why is that? Why, in an age where everyone has a high-resolution camera in their pocket, don't we have crystal clear Bigfoot footage? The skeptical answer is obvious, because Bigfoot doesn't exist, and any footage we see is either misidentification, hoax, or wishful thinking. But if we assume for a moment that Bigfoot does exist, there are some interesting possible explanations for the lack of clear evidence. First, these creatures might be remarkably good at detecting and avoiding cameras and recording devices. There's evidence that some animals can see or sense things outside normal human perception. If Bigfoot has evolved alongside humans for thousands of years, it might have developed an instinctive wariness of anything that looks like human technology. The smell of plastic and metal, the faint electronic hum of a trail camera, the presence of lens glass, all of these might be warning signs to a sufficiently intelligent creature. Second, Bigfoot might primarily be nocturnal or crepuscular, most active during dawn and dusk when lighting is poor. Most trail cameras struggle in low-light conditions, producing grainy or washed-out images even with night vision capabilities. A creature that's most active during these times would naturally be harder to photograph clearly. The Alaska footage, taken during what appears to be dawn or dusk, fits this pattern perfectly. Third, and this is where it gets really interesting, Bigfoot might be far rarer than we think. Instead of a thriving population of thousands spread across North America, we might be talking about a few hundred individuals clinging to existence in remote pockets of wilderness. If the population is that small and that spread out, the odds of any particular trail camera capturing one would be astronomically low. The Alaska sighting would be a genuine fluke. Right place, right time, pure chance. This rarity hypothesis actually makes a lot of sense when you look at the habitat requirements of a large primate. Bigfoot would need substantial territory to support itself, probably hundreds of square miles per individual or family group. They'd need reliable food sources year-round, which in Alaska means primarily plant material supplemented with fish, small animals, and occasional scavenging. They'd need shelter that provides protection from the elements during brutal winter months, and they'd need to avoid human contact, which gets harder every year as development encroaches on wilderness areas. If Bigfoot populations are declining, and there's reason to think they might be, every piece of footage becomes more precious. The Alaska trail camera capture might document a species that's slowly vanishing, pushed to the brink by habitat loss, climate change, and the ever-increasing human presence in what used to be genuinely remote wilderness. That's a sobering thought. Let me tell you about some other Alaska Bigfoot reports that provide context for this footage. In 1987, a bush pilot reported seeing a large, hair-covered humanoid figure standing on a ridge near the Nowitna River. He circled back for a second look, but the creature had vanished. In 1995, a hunting party near Lake Iliamna reported finding tracks in fresh snow that were 18 inches long and showed clear dermal ridges. In 2003, campers near Denali reported hearing loud, non-human vocalizations that went on for hours during the night. deep, resonant calls that didn't match any known animal. These reports, and hundreds like them, paint a picture of something large and elusive living in Alaska's wilderness. They're not proof, far from it, but they're data points. And when you start connecting those data points with physical evidence like tracks, damaged vegetation, and rare footage like our trail camera capture, patterns emerge. Something is out there. Whether it's an unknown primate, a remnant population of Gigantopithecus that somehow crossed the Bering land bridge, or something else entirely, the evidence suggests we're not alone in those forests. The scientific community's resistance to Bigfoot research is understandable but frustrating. Without a body or incontrovertible physical evidence, most scientists won't even consider the possibility. The career risk of being associated with cryptozoology is substantial. Researchers who take Bigfoot seriously often face ridicule and professional marginalization. But there are exceptions. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, an anatomy and anthropology professor at Idaho State University, has staked his reputation on the possibility that an unknown primate exists in North America. His analysis of track casts and footprint evidence suggests something with genuine anatomical complexity beyond what a simple hoax could achieve. Dr. John Bindernagel, a wildlife biologist who passed away in 2018, spent decades arguing that Bigfoot should be studied as wildlife rather than as a paranormal phenomenon. He pointed out that the behavior attributed to Bigfoot, being elusive, nocturnal, leaving minimal trace, is exactly what we'd expect from a large primate trying to avoid human contact. His work emphasized that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially in vast wilderness areas like Alaska, where countless species of animals remain poorly studied or completely undocumented. There's also the DNA angle, which has become increasingly important in recent years. Environmental DNA sampling, collecting genetic material from hair, scat, or even air and water, has revolutionized wildlife biology. Several studies have attempted to collect and analyze possible Bigfoot DNA samples. Results have been frustratingly inconclusive. Most samples turn out to be from known animals, bears, wolves, humans, but a few samples have produced results that don't match anything in existing genetic databases. These anomalous results get dismissed as contamination or degraded samples, but they're intriguing nonetheless. Coming back to our Alaska trail camera footage, what makes it significant isn't just what it shows, but what it represents. It represents the possibility that even in our hyper-connected, satellite-mapped world, there are still mysteries hiding in plain sight. It represents the tension between skepticism and open-mindedness, between demanding rigorous proof and acknowledging that absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence of absence. And it represents our deep, almost primal fascination with the idea that we might not be the only intelligent beings on this planet. The lack of follow-up on this footage bothers me more than anything else about the case. In a perfect world, researchers would have been able to visit the site where the trail camera was positioned. They could have looked for tracks, hair samples, scat, any physical evidence that might corroborate the footage. They could have set up additional cameras, perhaps with better resolution and different angles. They could have interviewed the property owner, gotten the full video file, conducted detailed forensic analysis. But none of that happened, and we're left with these two tantalizing frames and no clear answers. I've tried to track down the original poster through various means, but it's like they vanished into thin air. Their account on the forum is gone. The username doesn't appear anywhere else online. Attempts to trace the IP address or other digital footprints hit dead ends. It's possible they simply got spooked by the attention and wiped their online presence. It's also possible they realized posting the footage was a mistake for privacy or legal reasons and took steps to cover their tracks. Or, and this is the theory that keeps me up at night, maybe someone convinced them or compelled them to take everything down. The government suppression angle isn't something I want to dwell on too much because it can quickly veer into paranoid conspiracy territory. But it's worth noting that there are legitimate reasons why federal or state agencies might want to keep Bigfoot evidence under wraps. If an endangered species were discovered in areas currently used for logging, mining, or oil extraction, it could shut down those industries overnight. The economic impact would be enormous. Environmental protection laws would require massive habitat preservation. Land use disputes would multiply. It's not paranoid to suggest that powerful interests would prefer Bigfoot remain unproven. There's precedent for this kind of thing in wildlife management. When wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in the mid-1990s, it was controversial precisely because of the impact on land use and ranching. When spotted owls were declared endangered in the Pacific Northwest, it sparked bitter conflict over logging rights. If Bigfoot exists and were to be officially recognized, the fallout would make those controversies look minor by comparison. Millions of acres of forest might suddenly require protection. Human access to wilderness areas could be restricted. The whole relationship between humans and wild spaces would need to be rethought. But let's step back from conspiracy theories and look at the simpler explanation for why this footage disappeared. People lose interest. In the age of viral content and 24-hour news cycles, even the most remarkable evidence can fade from public consciousness in days. Something else captures our attention, and yesterday's sensation becomes forgotten. The Alaska trail camera footage might have simply been a victim of this phenomenon. It had its moment in the spotlight, generated some discussion, and then got buried under the endless avalanche of new content. Still, for those of us who are genuinely interested in the Bigfoot question, this footage remains important. It's one more piece of the puzzle, one more data point in a growing collection of evidence that something unusual is happening in North American wilderness areas. Taken in isolation, it proves nothing. But when you combine it with footprint evidence, witness testimony, audio recordings of strange vocalizations, and the work of researchers like Paulides documenting anomalous patterns in missing persons cases, a picture begins to emerge. That picture is murky and incomplete, sure, but it's there. And it suggests that the standard narrative, that Bigfoot is pure folklore with no basis in reality, might be too simplistic. Maybe the truth is more nuanced. Maybe there is something out there, but it's rarer and more elusive than popular culture suggests. Maybe it's not the 8-foot-tall monster of campfire stories, but something more subtle, more intelligent, and more skilled at avoiding detection than we give it credit for. I want to share one more story that I think connects to all of this. Last year, I was contacted by someone who claimed to have information about the Alaska trail camera footage. They said they lived in the same general area and had their own experiences with unexplained phenomena. They described finding tracks similar to those documented in Bigfoot research, large 5-toed impressions in mud and snow that didn't match any known animal. They described hearing vocalizations at night that sounded almost human but not quite, calls that carried across miles of wilderness and seemed to be answered by other unseen creatures. This person also told me something interesting about local attitudes toward Bigfoot. They said most longtime Alaskan residents don't talk openly about it, especially not with outsiders. It's not that they don't believe. Many of them have had their own experiences or know people who have. But there's a cultural resistance to discussing it publicly. Part of it is practical. They don't want their property overrun by Bigfoot hunters and cryptozoology tourists. Part of it is personal. These are people who value privacy and self-reliance, and admitting to a Bigfoot encounter feels uncomfortably close to asking for validation from outsiders who wouldn't understand anyway. And part of it, this person suggested, is respect. There's a sense among some Alaskans that if Bigfoot does exist, it deserves to be left alone. It's survived this long by avoiding humans and deliberately seeking it out, with cameras, with bait, with aggressive research tactics, feels wrong. The wilderness is its home, and we're the intruders. This perspective was eye-opening for me because it reframes the whole discussion. Maybe the lack of definitive evidence isn't a problem to be solved, but a boundary to be respected. That conversation has stuck with me, especially when I look at the trail camera footage. That Bigfoot wasn't posing for the camera. It wasn't trying to be documented. It was simply moving through its territory, going about its business, and happened to trigger a motion sensor. For those few seconds, the boundary between human and Bigfoot worlds briefly dissolved, giving us a glimpse into something we're not usually allowed to see. And then it was gone, back into the forest, back into mystery. Is the footage real? I genuinely don't know. I've presented the evidence as objectively as I can, acknowledging both the reasons to be skeptical and the reasons to take it seriously. What I do know is that something remarkable was captured on that trail camera in Alaska. Whether it's an unknown primate, an elaborate hoax, or something else entirely, it represents a moment when our comfortable certainties about the world were challenged, and that's valuable in itself. The Bigfoot question isn't going away. As long as people venture into wilderness areas, there will be sightings. As long as trail cameras dot remote forests, there will be occasional footage of things that don't quite fit our understanding of what should be out there. As long as researchers like David Paulides document strange patterns in missing persons cases, we'll have reason to wonder what might be lurking just beyond the edges of civilization. The Alaska trail camera footage is just one chapter in this ongoing story. For now, those two frames remain. A dark, massive figure moving through Alaskan wilderness, captured accidentally by a camera that was looking for something else entirely. Whatever the truth behind the images, they remind us that mystery still exists in our world. There are still places where human knowledge and human technology haven't penetrated, still creatures that might remain unknown despite our best efforts to catalog and categorize everything around us. And maybe, just maybe, there's still room in the 21st century for cryptids and legends and things that go bump in the night. The clearest footage of Bigfoot? Possibly. The final word on whether Bigfoot exists? Definitely not. But it's evidence, real or hoaxed, that keeps the question alive. And as long as that question remains alive, people will keep looking, keep documenting, keep trying to solve one of the most enduring mysteries in North American folklore. The Alaska trail camera footage might not give us definitive answers, but it gives us something equally valuable. It gives us reason to keep asking the questions. For more interesting stories, check this out.